Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Johan Berger. I have the privilege of welcoming you here at our African Angle breakfast session. Topic of today is business and investment opportunities in the agribusiness sector in Nigeria. Food, ladies and gentlemen, has become extremely important for Africa. So much so that the President of the African Development Bank, Agri, has identified it as one of his high five priorities for the African Development Bank. The UN has identified the eradication of hunger as one of its sustainable development goals. And if you have a look at the African Union's Agenda 2063, there are various instances also of where food and hunger is addressed and the quality of life of Africa is addressed. Africa sits with the challenge that it is on the one hand urbanizing at a very fast rate, and its population is set to grow in leaps and bounds as well. We're looking at 2.5 billion people by 2050 and more than 4 billion people by the year 2100. So agriculture has become very important. In Nigeria itself, we have the current president, we have the previous president of Obasanjo, we have the current president of the African Development Bank, Agri, and you have Africa's richest person, Aliko Dangote, also propagating that Nigeria and Africa in general should be moving from a stance, from a focus on resource exports to agriculture as its renewed focus to diversify its economy and reducing its vulnerabilities given the oil price sort of volatilities, as well as then the end of the commodity price super cycle. It is with this as background that Dr. Adefulake Adeyeye, our research fellow at the Center for African Studies, undertook a deep dive in what are the business opportunities, the investment opportunities in the agricultural sector in Nigeria. What I did not mention up until now is that if you listen to Adesina, about $35 billion worth of food is imported annually. If you look at the stats of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, there is a shortfall, a deficit of annual deficit of more than $40 billion, where Africa is importing more than it's exporting in the line of agricultural products. Fulake has identified quite a number of opportunities, and I think without further ado, I'm going to ask her to come and present her findings. They're extremely interesting, to such an extent that I said we must give these findings to the broader community of Singapore. Fulake, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come for this presentation. As Johan has said, it will be on business and investment opportunities in the agribusiness industry in Nigeria. And it gives me great pleasure as a Nigerian and as a research fellow at the Center. The Center is a think tank that really wants to promote business and trade ties between Asia and Africa. I think it's two now, using Singapore as a gateway. And so it gives me real pleasure to talk about this area, which is a big deal in Nigeria and would hopefully be of use to those of us here. I should highlight that the presentation is based on a full report, and I believe that the full report will be made available to those who actually want to get that report. The slides will also be available, so please feel free to approach Eileen Dayun or Stella if you would like the slides. All right, I'm going to just go right into the agenda for today. So I will give a very brief. Can you hear me? Yes. All right, so I'm just going to ignore that. Yeah. So I will give a very brief introduction of Nigeria. I'll talk about Nigeria's growth, the agribusiness policy, challenges and opportunities, and I really will be focusing on the challenges and opportunities and trying to highlight the opportunities in those challenges. So there are challenges and there's some opportunities which are very obvious, but in the challenges, there are other opportunities that will become obvious, and I hope that by the time we leave, that will sort of be at the top of our minds. And then talk a little bit about government activity and give a conclusion. So just very, very quick, Nigeria is located in West Africa, and on the, I think it's the right-hand side of your slides is really a map of Nigeria. There are 19 states in the northern part of Nigeria, plus the Federal Capital Territory. There are 6 states in the southwestern part of Nigeria, which is where I come from. And there are 5 states in the southeast, and then I think about 6 states in the south-south. So that should kind of add up to 36 states, plus the Federal Capital Territory. Now, the states have comparative advantages in crop, right? And I will show you that in a while. So pretty much every region in Nigeria has a comparative advantage in a number of crops. And what we've done in this presentation is selected a few of those crops which are relevant for, which we think will be useful for Singapore business, Singapore interest, and where possible, we have actually we've discussed this with Singapore business, that have a lot of expertise in Africa to kind of give us a sense of the crops and the products we should be thinking about. Obviously, there's so many of them, and we really had to make a judgment call on the ones that we will, we will write the report on. So, of course, a question you could have is, well, why this particular crops? So that's just to kind of give you a sense of that. But one thing that's very clear and should be said is the fact that even though we've selected a number of crops, you should know that agribusiness opportunities in Africa, in Nigeria, go beyond that. And pretty much a lot of what we will be talking about today would be useful, even if you decided to think about, if we were interested in other crops apart from the ones we're going to be focusing on this morning. Okay, so and a valid question also be, why invest in Nigeria? What's there? So maybe if you just very quickly see that there are about 180 plus, all right? So still counting. Some would say about 187 million of us. That already tells you how huge the market is. And by 2015, I thought it was very important to sort of put that there, that by 2015, we will overtake the United States. We will become the 3rd largest population in the world. Our GDP ranking now is about 22, and there's potential that it will move up to 14. Obviously, we have to do a lot of things to kind of get there. An average annual growth of almost 4.5%. So you can already see that there's huge potential in Nigeria. It's just insatiable. You really cannot. You can't go through everything. And I think as we go ahead, even in the areas where it seems there's a lot of activity going on, there's still so much more that can be done. Okay, and if you think about it, agriculture is one of the things that has been identified that will support this growth. So, we usually will talk about having a young population, urbanization, and all that, but agriculture really is at the core of it, and it's also seen as one of the areas of, we know that we have to diversify, and agriculture is one of the areas where if we really want to see that growth, then we need to kind of go into it. So, it just makes it clear that, look, this is an area worth looking at, this is an area worth, finding out what are the opportunities that I, as a businessman, investor, can get. And as we go ahead, I think we will have examples of some Singapore companies and other companies that really have kind of caught this and are doing things in the space right now. Okay, so this is just to give you a sense of the agri-business policy in Nigeria. So there's an agriculture promotion policy from 2016 to 2020, and it really wants to build on the successes of the agriculture transformation agenda, which sort of was what was in place when Adesina was the agriculture minister. So Johan just sort of talked about that. So you can already see that he did a lot of work while he was there. And Nigeria obviously wants to kind of go and work on that. So this is sort of what the agriculture promotion policy. So what they've done is they've really looked at that. They've looked at gaps. They've looked at issues and challenges, and they're trying to work on that. But on the right-hand side, I really just put that those figures there just for you to have a sense of what the demand in Nigeria is and what the supply is. So in a sense, local supply and what the demand is. So for example, I think if you look at rice, the demand is about 6.3 million and the supply is 2.3 million, right? So, that's about a difference of over 4 million. Where does that sort of come from? So we'll talk a little bit, about how Nigeria is trying to address that. It's also interesting to know that for rice, for tomato, for wheat, they're actually trying to get to a stage where they have self-sufficiency. Now they keep sort of changing the times when that would happen, but that is something very much that Nigeria is trying to actually be self-sufficient. And if we think about the demand if we think about the demand, then we know that definitely there's a lot that they need to do. And this is also where then what private investors can do, it becomes really obvious that we do need private investment to kind of help with this. Okay, so this is just very quickly, it's just to give you a sense of the comparative advantage crops by region. Okay, so this is not, obviously we're not going to talk about all the crops here, but this is just to give you a sense of where Nigeria sort of identified the states that have comparative advantage. So I'm just going to run through them very quickly. So that was the Northeast, the North Central, Southwest, Southeast, and South-South. Now, something that probably would be obvious to you is that rice, cassava are crops that pretty much every region, is able to have a comparative advantage. Obviously, we do have some who sort of are the leaders, and kind of are there, but pretty much, if you look at this slide, then it gives you a sense that, across Nigeria, you are able to kind of make these crops work. Okay, so I think for the rest of my presentation, then I will just talk about the challenges and the opportunities. And I thought this was a good slide to sort of put up because it's one from the FAO, and it pretty much talks about the challenges in the agricultural value chain in Nigeria. And I'm not sure if you sort of can really see what it says there, but essentially the challenges are constraints on access to land, low irrigation levels, adopting research and technology, high cost of farm inputs, poor access to credits and markets, fertilizer procurement and distribution, storage facilities, post-harvest loss. And the hope is that as we look through these challenges, then we will see the opportunities and model solutions to the challenges. So it sort of says that in spite of the oil, agriculture remains the base of the Nigerian economy, providing the main source of livelihood for most Nigerians. Okay, and then it goes on to talk about pretty much the challenges I really just talked about. Now, so one of the challenges obviously is access to land. So that is a big one, and that's one obviously that sort of involves governments and all that as well. But just to give you a sense of what is needed, right? So we obviously need more land to be cultivated for agriculture. So to give you a sense, for rice right now, and this statistics is actually quite generous. Some will say it's about 2 million, but approximately about 3.7 million hectares is under cultivation. And some say that you probably need maybe 5 million or even more, for you to really get the conversation going where it should be. Industrial cassava itself, the Cassava Growers Association have actually talked about the need for 5 million hectares just for industrial cassava production. And then oil palm plantation estimates right now is at about 169,000 to 360,000 hectares. Some research has said Nigeria needs about 2 trillion naira actually to sort of get the oil palm industry where it needs to be. And I think as we go on again, we'll see some reasons really why, what are the opportunities in some of these sectors. Okay, so another challenge is irrigation. So with irrigation, the slides that you see on that end it gives you a sense of Nigeria's yield. So it says Asia's rice production is over 80 million hectares and it yields 5 tons. So remember what we had said about the area of cultivation for rice in Nigeria. And that is probably not so recent. Those figures are not so recent. But if you look at the yield in Nigeria, you will see that it's somewhere just under 2. Okay, just under 2 tons sort of per hectare. So there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done. Another example that sort of isn't here is that with tomato cultivation, they actually are having problems with irrigation. So Delta, for example, is trying to kind of get on the bandwagon and not just lead tomato cultivation to the northern states. And they are struggling with irrigation. And actually, really, the bottom line, as it says at the bottom, Africa has only 4% of crops irrigation land, and it's really due to a lack of financial investments. So this is another area where we need financial investments to kind of come in and help. And obviously, this will improve the yield and the quality of the crops. And research and technology. Now, we know across Africa, that's sort of a big one. I found this really interesting. Nigeria's agricultural research system has over 78 institutions and organizations, research institutes, federal colleges of agriculture, facilities in universities, and specialized agricultural universities. So the one I just put there is the University of Agriculture, UNAB, that one there. And it's just interesting that with so many institutions and organizations, we are still having issues with sustainable growth being engineered. We're having issues with translating research into field usage. And obviously, one good thing people will talk about in that area is let's get situations where people, the private sector actually think about funding, scholarships, words, professorship chairs, and all of that. So that definitely is one area. But a good example. So definitely, they need to do more, and that's one area that Nigeria really needs to look into. That either you get rid of some of them, or you really do. We begin to see the essence of having all these systems in place, this research system in place. But I thought, a model. So remember, we're looking at challenges, opportunities, and we're trying to find models for solutions in somewhere there. And I thought a good one was really the private sector collaboration between the GEMS S4. It's a joint venture, and it's actually a joint venture between Coffee. Coffee is a geotechnical engineering firm, and it's now part of Tractor Tech, the UK Department for International Development, the World Bank, and the Nigerian government. So that they've sort of come up with this joint venture. And what they're trying to do is trying to map farming clusters in northern Nigeria to provide accurate data. So they sort of, they map, they look for, they provide information on social and demographic features, on size, varieties grown, average yields, and seasonality. So they're using technology to sort of help the small farm holders and across the value chain. Another one is really the high inputs, high cost of inputs. I want to put that in a little bit of perspective and context. More than 80% of farmers in Nigeria are smallholder farmers. And as a result, you can see the need for subsidized inputs and mechanization services. They also need support from small and large-scale farmers' support. Now, the picture I put there of Tomato Jos is really just an example of a small African agricultural production company that provides education, technological support, and bundled imports to help smallholder farmers grow and harvest crops more efficiently. Tomato Just is an interesting one because it was set up by two alumni from Harvard Business School. And what had happened was one of them had been in Nigeria, in the northern part at one time, and she had seen the way tomatoes were really just going to waste, and she really couldn't believe that. So when she went back, she was doing her at Harvard, this was an idea that came to her, and she really set this up as a for-profit social enterprise. So it just goes to show that, you see the opportunities there, you've got to do the research, you've got to talk to the right people, but you can, this is just an example of you having to make it work, not just, the large-scale farmers like Olam and all that, but even small-scale, and people who are interested across the value chain can help. While of course there's so much more that could be said about the high input costs, but I wanted to single out the poultry sector. For two reasons, or at least two reasons. One is Sri is actually here, and he's going to give a comment after this. And he recently just came back from Nigeria, where they inaugurated their animal feed and poultry meal. And this is really interesting. We were just having a conversation just before we came in, because the Nigerian poultry sector is going to grow leaps and bounds. Right now, there are about 180 million of us, and research suggests that we only consume about 0.9 kilograms of poultry. And I think if we compare this to South Africa and to Ghana, which is, just tiny Ghana, they're way ahead of us, 4 point something, 5 point something. So you can already see that we're not reaching the potential. If you add to that the fact that urbanization, there's more income to spend, people are beginning to see the need for nutrition, and poultry is an easy way to kind of get to that. Also, actually, it's one of the most commercialized subsectors in the agri sector. But having said that, there's still lots of issues and lots of problems. So going again to the model solution, Olam saw this opportunity. They saw the problem. So the example I've given you there, in 2010, soybean cost $485 per ton. By 2011, 1 year after, it had gone up to $775 per ton. Really, that obviously tells you that people are going to substitute and use low quality. And so Olam saw that opportunity, and they sort of came into the space, and obviously with their animal feed now, they also have like the hatchery kind of in there. So with all this, they are going to make an impact in the poultry sector. I think one other thing that's probably interesting to note is that Nigeria they have like an education scheme now that they're trying to kind of make sure that children are fed. One example is they are trying to increase the production of eggs to about 50 million per day. Now, obviously, if Olam's kind of in this space and making sure that they have everything that's in there, you can understand if it works out. If Nigeria gets its act together and we're actually able to go ahead with this scheme, it's called the NEG Pro scheme, then you can understand how there are opportunities there. And just to say that, this is one, but even across the value chain, there are other opportunities for the savvy businessman or investor. So it's really looking at those little things. You don't necessarily have to look at the big things, and we'll talk about a little bit of those as well. Okay, and I think, one that we sort of need to go to, which ties in maybe with Tomato Just and the previous slide, about the high input costs, is really just the amount of loss that sort of happens. So tomato is a good example, but it's not the only example. Fruits is another example in Nigeria. And the statistics suggest that about 45% of the crops really just are lost. It's just post-harvest loss that really, and to give you that example there, so you can see there that that's actually from the green alternative, the agricultural policy I'd shown you earlier. The demand was 2.2 million, production was 1.5 million, but out of that 1.5 million, 0.7 million was lost to post-harvest. Just basically not having the right storage, not having the the transport, logistics, and processing, marketing, all these things. But you can see that these are some of the bullet points I put there, just some reasons why we have post-harvest loss. So, when the supply chain management is poor, product fluctuation, when prices are not stable. It's very interesting, in fact, to see that the picture down there is really an example of Dangote. So one of the things is Nigeria, we consume a lot of tomatoes. At the same time, we import a lot of tomato paste. And it makes no sense because we have the potential to be the largest producer of kind of tomatoes. So it's going to take us to the issue of processing, which we will get to in a minute. But Dangote is trying to change that. So they came up with this processing factory, and the idea was to kind of have outgrow schemes where people can bring in tomatoes to ensure that they can actually have tomato paste. But unfortunately, it wasn't Ebola, I can't remember what it's called, but it's more like agricultural Ebola sort of happened last year in Nigeria, and it was just a waste. It was a complete wipeout. I remember I was at home about that time, and the cost of tomato was unbelievable. People actually, even the poor couldn't afford to eat tomatoes, and they had to come up with different ideas. And I think about that time, I'm not sure if it was carrots, people came up with the idea that actually if you blend carrots, it could substitute sort of for tomatoes. So innovation, you could say, but you can sort of see that where that's going. But to sort of get back to the point, so essentially what happened was, even though there was a grant scheme in place to pay the farmers more than they normally would be paid, they couldn't do that because the crops were not available. And really, so what YieldWise has really done then is YieldWise basically is a 130 million initiative of the Rockefeller Foundation. And they are working with the private sector to fix the broken links in the tomato value chain. So they train farmers, they provide opportunities to aggregate with other farmers, they provide access to new markets, they ensure access to technologies to improve storage handling and other production practices. So it does seem that, even though, and what happened was, because of that, a lot of farmers actually didn't want to go on with this scheme. So they're like, we don't want to plant tomato this year because we don't want the same thing to happen. So YieldWise and other interested stakeholders have really tried to give them the sense of, look, we are able to find you an alternative market, and try and find schemes for them, insurance and all that, so that they don't really lose out. So, this is an example sort of what's working, and it's become very obvious that we have to deal with post-harvest loss. So the GEMS 4 I talked about is also looking into post-harvest loss. Now I can conclude, and that gives you a sense that I'm almost there. I'm not sure how much time I sort of have left. Okay. So, but I really can't conclude without talking about processing capacities. It's well known, okay, that the need to add value is one of the main problems we have in Africa. But obviously I'm focusing on Nigeria here. Across the subsectors of interest in this report, the need to add value in the form of processing is a stark reality. And if we can get that together, it will be a different story we're talking about in terms of the growth that Nigeria will see. I've just sort of singled out 4 there, and I'm going to talk briefly about that. So let's take the case of cassava, for example. It's a lucrative market for investors. You can use it for food and non-food industries. Just to give you a sense, in 2001, only 16% of the cassava root production in Nigeria was utilized for industrial raw material. And 10% of that went to animal feed, 5% went to syrup, and 1% went to the high quality cassava flour. In 2014, the commercial use of cassava was only 165 tons. Now, the latent demand for industrial cassava is estimated at 4.8 million tons, but they say a more realistic demand is about 1.8 million tons. But whatever how you put it, you can see the difference between 165,000 and 1.8. And this is the sad part of it. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. We need cassava for industrial use, so industrial starch. We still import about 95% of industrial starch, 200 million liters of food-grade ethanol, and over 90,000 tons of glucose sweetener. And so the idea is that, if you remember when the Cassava Growers Association, the slide I showed you, where it said they need about 5 million hectares for industrial, cassava alone. So the idea is, if we can really get our acts together in that area, we will not only have enough for ourselves, we will have enough actually for export, for others as well. And Thai Farm, so just on your right-hand side again, Thai Farm International is now a member of the Flour Mills Nigeria Group, and they're the largest processors of locally grown cassava and producers of high-quality cassava flour. Now, there's so much about high cassava flour, but all I would really say is that, if we use it purposefully and properly, it can help reduce Nigeria's dependence on wheat imports, which is now estimated at $6 billion. Now, a lot has been done to try and make sure that, high cassava flour, quality flour is used for bread. Obviously, there are challenges with that, and we've had basically different administrations who've kind of placed, more emphasis on it, and some that haven't really put it. But the truth of the matter is, there is still something valid to be said for using high cassava quality flour. This is another area, another good area for business opportunities and investments. Even very simple things as trying to get the right consistency of cassava flour you should add to, wheat or whatever, to kind of get the bread in a situation where it's actually consumable. And it's very interesting because research, not just in Nigeria, but in other areas, FAO, they've all looked into this area. And it's one challenge we must know is it's really difficult to get the right consistency. It's really difficult to get the bread which we'll be able to consume. But therein lies an opportunity, an opportunity from people who love cooking, who are into, baking, right now with gluten-free, sometimes you don't get the same consistency as the cake, but if you keep at it, people are starting, to actually produce good quality gluten-free, food. So it's really being innovative. It's really sitting in your little corner and saying, look, what is my passion? What can I do? What helps? And seeing how you can use that. So, there's been a lot of research there, but don't think about the fact that it couldn't be of value. So that's just giving you a very, very minute area of something that could be useful in that area. And in this area, again, in terms of processing capacities, you really can see that this picture actually is quite recent, and I got it from This Day newspaper in Nigeria. But the Edo State essentially had come to Singapore, the quote there, it says, recall that Governor Obaseki recently sealed arrangement for the Tolerant Group to invest 50 million in oil palm and cassava production to be used in the company's manufacturing industries. Now, if you think about cassava, you find out that in 2013, this is maybe a fun fact, but in 2013, the noodle industry was said to consume approximately 72,000 metric tons of refined, bleached, and deodorized palm oil. So it's no wonder, okay, Tolerant, they are the ones that kind of took Indomie noodles, which is an Asian food, to Nigeria. It's no wonder that they recently signed this agreement to ensure that they can actually get palm oil for their manufacturing industry. Tomato paste, is another one. I know we've talked about it quite a bit, but it's useful to sort of have a sense of the value add. If we go into tomato paste and other tomato-based products, the value add that will have across the agriculture value chain. I want to spend a bit of time on fruit juice and fruit-based products and mixed nuts. Nigeria produces large quantities of fruits. In fact, I think we're the largest producer of pineapples, if not in the world, definitely in Africa. Papayas, mangoes, guavas. According to the FAO statistics, and just to give you a sense, in 2014, we produced 3.8 million tons of citrus fruit. Africa on the whole produced 4.8 million. The expanding middle class in Nigeria, the recognition of the nutritional value of fruits has given rise to increased demand. But unfortunately, if we sort of go back to the post-harvest loss we were talking about, a lot of it is wasted. Due again to processing capacity. It's interesting actually due to poor demand. So people don't really want the Nigerian fruits. It's probably just lying in waste sort of there, and because you don't really have the processing capacities, you cannot actually convert it into juice and into other things as well. Handling and transportation. So all these issues are sort of similar to the ones we talked about when we were looking at the post-harvest loss. In 2016, about $524 million, and that's kind of, I tried to do a conversion at today's rate, but the rate in Naira is actually 165 billion was spent on fruit juice imports. But one thing we must say is that fruit juice sort of is actually, the sector is actually maturing in Nigeria in terms of, if you're thinking about fruit juice, and we do have strong players there who are visible, who are really working and all that. But an area of opportunity again for us here is actually to look at coconuts. Now, Nigeria has, I think out of the 36, so the research, out of the 36 states of Nigeria, at least 22 of them, produce coconuts. Lagos being kind of the highest producer of coconuts. There's so much potential in coconut production and processing. When I was doing my research, Technavo actually gave a suggestion that the global coconut water market is about $4 billion. So you can already imagine, if we use the coconuts we have, and not just even coconut water, okay, so we can have coconut juice, we can use it for cosmetics, for so many different things that we could sort of use it for if we process it. So it's worthwhile looking into it. And interestingly, now Foco coconuts, they actually get their coconuts from Southeast Asia. But when I was doing my research, for the first time, Foco coconut was available in Nigeria. It's an interesting one to think about, and this will really just take me to the pretty much last slide before the conclusion, which is I think I had talked about fruit palm oil when I sort of was talking about tolerance, but just to give you a sense, palm kernel cake can be used for animal feed as well. Palm kernel oil can be used in the non-food and the food industry. So the potential, as I had said before, is huge. But this will sort of be the main slide before the conclusion. I think it's important to sort of know government activity and restrictions. So of course, while we're going through all this, you may be thinking, I want to export this product. I really just want to go into export and all that in Nigeria. It's important to sort of know that, well, some of them you cannot import into Nigeria. Some of them, there are restricted, the foreign exchange restrictions, which makes it really difficult sort of for you to import those. So on my right, sorry, which is your left, you really cannot bring live beds or dead beds, including frozen poultry. So all that talk we sort of said about poultry, you have to do it on soil. You have to kind of do it in Nigeria, in a sense, except you want to be legal and smuggle, and all that. Eggs, excluding hatching eggs. So hatching eggs you can bring in, but eggs you really can't. Fruit juice in retail packs. You cannot bring in fruit juice in retail packs, but you can bring in fruit juice in drums. So for example, I guess that's why it's easy, and then the idea is repackage it. I know you can have lots of questions around that area. I had it as well, but it was more just the policy of the government at the time, the decisions they gave, the reasons they gave, but anyway, that's kind of where it is now. You can bring in fruit juice in drums, but not in retail packs. So I guess the idea is you come and do the repackaging in Nigeria. I think one other thing, my research, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to tell you everything, we're almost getting there, is just to show you how
The packaging industry, that's something completely different as well. But anyway, you can do that. So I guess in the sense of the focal coconut water, which is produced here, you know, it makes sense. If they sort of bring it in drums, then they can put it in there. So that's just one. But it really, it's a tight market, I must say, the fruit juice. But just look at other areas. Citrus fruit, for example, is one of the favorite people, you know, is one of the favorite tastes. So you can explore, you can think about other combinations. You know, Tabaram was able to take noodles to Nigeria. So you can think about other combinations that might work. But anyway, I thought it was important to kind of put it out there. Foreign exchange import restrictions. And where there are foreign exchange import restrictions, you find there's a lot of activity on ground. So rice, you know, there are quite a few strong players in the area of rice. But when I was actually talking to Shri, sometime when I was doing the research, maybe he'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but he did talk about the fact that even though there are strong players there, and when you do the research, you get the sense of back off. He's like, no, there's still actually quite a lot that can be done, even in the rice value chain. So, you know, poultry, chicken, eggs, these are all areas that are being busy tomato. So, in conclusion, you know, I hope it's obvious, you know, that the agribusiness, you know, potential is largely untapped in Nigeria. All I've told you here is really just, I would say, the tip of the iceberg in a sense. And challenges, see those challenges. There are challenges. So we didn't talk about even infrastructure, you know, regulatory, whatever. See them as opportunities. But I think one thing that is really, you know, clear or becoming clear is the fact that you need to consider your presence on ground. So it's not really just about remotely. I was at a digital talk yesterday by the IE, and there was one of the speakers was from mainland China, but he's the one that set up Kili Mall in Southeast Asia. And you know, just talking to him and knowing that, you know, we kind of reaffirmed that again, that you really have to be on ground if you really want to make it work, and you've got to be ready to be on ground for quite some time. You do need strong knowledge. I think maybe, you know, from this you really have to make sure you do the research. The tomato just, I was watching a video, reading a little bit more about her, and she was talking about how she just, you know, anyone that would talk to me in Nigeria, I would talk to, you know, I would try and get the contact. Google, there was another person that said, look, Google was my friend. I Googled everything possible. So you have to do the research, you know. And you know, another thing, the beauty of Singapore is IE, SBF, you know, you have institutions that are actually really willing to help. And I know that when I talk to people from SBF, they think about SMEs, they think about, you know, the small businesses, not necessarily the big ones, you know, how do we kind of get them involved? So, you know, there are opportunities, and hopefully we at the center, you know, we do the research, we try and help in that area as well. And of course, you know, from all the things we've said, the examples where, you know, foreign exchange is restricted or banned, then you have to think about domestic production and manufacturing. You know, but, you know, if I'm going to just end it with everything, you know, you can be involved in many areas across the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to ask Mr. Venkatramani Srivatsan, Sri as we know him fondly, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director for Olam International Group Olam Group International in Africa and Middle East, to provide his comments and insight on agribusiness opportunities in Nigeria. Sri, thank you very much for your willingness. We're looking forward to listening to you.
Thanks, Yuvan. Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. That was a very nice presentation, Farake. I should congratulate you. In 45 minutes, you have really sold the Nigerian agricultural sector quite well, and quite informative as well. And I'm really aware of the time, and I'm also a little hot pressed for time, so I won't take more time. I just want to really probably specify 2 or 3 points here, and probably more relevant for SMEs. because what Falake presented is all, a plate of opportunities, what we can do. And she did say what the challenges and the challenges, how you can convert them into opportunities. Nigeria, for that matter, Africa, if you put it this one, the biggest thing is the huge potential it offers in the agri sector, whether it's arable land or, in terms of resources, available resources. But what it lacks is the ag infrastructure. And all this, what you see is, whether it is the production loss, Nigeria is exceptionally high at 45%, but the average African loss is not far behind. It's more than 1/3, 35% as if you take an African average, including South Africa. So that's, as an organization, we have also realized that if you want to really get into any activity, like for example this poultry, the sector, we had recently announced our investment in animal feed and fish feed and poultry feed. We realized that if you have to be really successful, if you have to be really make an impact, and if you have to really, first obviously you have to be long term, and you have to do an end-to-end. You need to have a solution of an end-to-end, because you cannot depend on the supply chain, the ag structure. You say that, okay, I'm just a miller, I want to go only do just milling, the rest I don't bother. Then you can just produce and keep it in your factory and keep clicking photographs of that. So you need to have complete this one. So for example, the first thing we did, Falake showed this one. One of the key ingredients for our animal feed or the poultry feed is soya bean. So one of the reasons we got in is because we have a good origination skill. So the last year we procured more than 200,000 tons of soya bean locally. But if you are just putting up a mill in, say, in the northern part of Nigeria, and if you don't have this one, because there is really no developed supply chain that you can get your feedstock automatically just setting up a mill. Those things are developed. So my advice always to anybody who gets into invest there, you think about all this. It's not that you can do a plug and play. Plug and play in, especially in agri sector, in most parts of Africa, really doesn't work. So one advice, one key thing is really how you can, first you need to see what all you need, right from your raw materials to, your end products, whether it is for exports or whether it is for the domestic market, what you need. You need to have a very clear idea. And then you really need to map out who's providing what is available, what is not available. If it is not available, my advice for SMEs is then have a collaborative approach. Take, if you're a food company, you're a food processor, take a packaging guy with you, whom you are comfortable with, you are work with in this part of the world, take them with you. If you are a farm guy, you take a processor with you. That's the only way. Or you do your homework and then really tie up all this. Otherwise, you will be left. You can putting the investment, the hardware is the easier thing. But then making it a business is the toughest challenge. Then you will look around, you say that, oh, this is not available, oh, that is not available. Yes, that is those are the challenges. But if you have this integrated approach, if you have this end-to-end approach, then sky is the limit. Really, sky is the limit. And she since Falake mentioned particularly about the rice sector. Again, rice, I just want to end my speech by just saying a couple of comments about the rice. The rice is something which is extremely very sensitive. various governments in the last 15 years have talked about rice importation ban, and this one. Frankly, yes, on paper there is rice imports is banned, but I know that Nigeria has porous borders. The rice is pouring in through the borders. But what it does definitely has helped is players like us who really want to create an impact. We had had invested. Unfortunately, the government wanted many such companies like Olam to come and invest, but that has not really happened. But whoever has invested has not really regretted, because that has really created an opportunity for us to really invest, because investing in a commercial rice farm and also the rice mill, rice supply chain, it's a long-term game. It takes minimum 5-7 years to really get to some size and some scale and so on. So, but that has given us that breather because of this policy protection. That has definitely given us the breather. But the one advice to, even when we, for the policy makers also, what we see saying is, many a times you see that the government makes with a right intention, right this one, they make best of the policies. When it comes to implementation, execution, that's where the countries really lack, and that's where you see the difference from, say, a country like Singapore and a country in Africa. I'm not here singling out Nigeria or anything. So this is something. First, as a businessman, when you are going to into any country in Africa or in emerging market, more to say in Africa, you should be prepared for that. And this is something we keep, and forums like this, when the government, the various the government, the ministers and others come, this is the advocacy we make, that how they see take a template from countries like Singapore, how they go and implement those policies, how execute, and that gives that confidence for the investors. The Rwandan ambassador here, it's a classic example of what Rwanda has done. Is something Rwanda today is, I'm not just, not because he is here I'm saying this, it's a real poster boy for rest of Africa. I don't know how many of you have been to Kigali. I had been to Kigali 20 years back. I had been to Kigali recently, about 6 months back. It's completely changed place. So the issue here is, clearly you need to have, coming back to the subject, you need to have Africa, of course, Nigeria in particular has a huge opportunity in agricultural sector. Really, it's a vast, open, but open ended. This one you can really pick and choose where you want to play and how you want to. This one, sky is the limit. But have an integrated approach. Have a complete business, end-to-end business plan, and some of it, maybe some logistics and this one, things have changed here. There are local service providers, but to complete tie-up, what you need from right from farm to fork, whatever you need to tie up. You need to have this one on day one when you go and set up your shop there, and that's probably my. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sri. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware of the fact that we are over 10 o'clock. We did start 10 minutes late, 12 minutes late, so that leaves us with 6 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions towards either Pilati or Sri, please, Stella has the...
Hi. Hi. Thank you both of you for the wonderful presentation. I'm Audrey from BRM. So my question would be, how forward-looking is the Nigerian government and Olam into ensuring safe food and working towards organic food, for example? I have a couple of questions I think 2 or 3. you know, with respects to rice, for example, you know, are you using pesticides or, you know, chemical fertilizers? For chicken farms, are you using antibiotics, for example? Because to me, 5 ton per hectare yield for rice is actually not a lot, even in Asia, because from what I know, my clients can go up to 10, 11 ton per hectare in a non-chemical way. So I just want to know the views and perspective, you know, what is being done towards that, and what is the soil restriction in Nigeria?
What is
Restriction on soil.
restriction soil?
Yeah.
Shall I take this?
Yes.
First of all, really, you know, organic farming or this one, to be honest and fair to you, it's still a very boutique, you know, novel concept in Africa. Because if you know, you see, the country is really, you know, food security and food self-sufficiency is still a big issue. And it's characterized by very poor yield and very poor this one. But but the governments, since you had specifically asked about Nigeria, they have very clear when it comes to using of pesticides, you know, what you can use, what you can do. The regulatory framework is very clear. So it's not, you know, you can use anything and everything. In fact, Nigeria is one of the countries where it is quite advanced and quite those one. So I would say definitely we are not doing organic farming. First, I want to clarify this is clearly not an organic farming. But having said that, the soil per se is because it is not used. It's a virgin soil most of the places because it's probably you are using it for the first time. It's hardly used land, so it's a fertile soil. That's our experience wherever we see whichever crop. So with the right agronomy practices, with the right amount of fertilization, you always see that you are able to improve create an impact on the yield. I'm not too sure, 5 tons, why do you say it's very high? Because if you look at the Chinese average or a Thailand average or even Vietnamese average, it's much higher than that, country average. So a fully irrigated farm, 5 tons is a minimum. Yes, India is still at around 3.5 tons, but then, but where they have reached at that scale from less than 1 ton 35 years back, and they have now gone to about 3.5 tons. So 5 tons is not. It is an ambitious target for the country, which is around 1.5 tons. But it is not impossible. At least I have seen countries achieving that, in 2-3 decades. So on the poultry question, I missed your question.
What is the policy so far looking towards? Because we know that a lot of chicken farms are using antibiotics somehow to constrain or manage bird flu, for example.
But as I said, the regulatory framework is very clear, and they, in fact, the agencies which control this one, whether it is NAPDAC or this one, they are really very strict and stringent, and they really follow the FDA and other models. So those are one of the, in terms of implementation and execution, that is some of the things which Nigeria had done very well right from early years. So the poultry farming, the issue is not really about the usage of antibiotics or usage of this one. It is more about how organized the sector is. Subscale farming, and people are not really fully organized. A smallholder farmer doesn't have the right infrastructure. So that is the issue really affecting, not because, wherever we have seen, there are organized farms, there are corporate, this one, few corporate companies apart from Olam who has been in that sector, and you see there it is as good as what you can see elsewhere in the world.
Okay, I'll just add maybe a few things. So with regards to food safety, so I mean, you can go into the report, there's more. So for example, I do talk a little bit about organic farming and organic produce.
the eastern side of Africa are the ones that are sort of better at that. So Uganda, for example, is kind of at the top. I do note the fact that there's potential, and just like Sri said, we haven't really, we're not really, we haven't reached that area really. It's an area that is important that we have to look at. But just two things. So in terms of the food safety, which you asked about as well, it's one thing that I've acknowledged here that it needs to be revamped. Maybe just very quickly let you know that between 2013 and 2018, the European Union actually funded the National Quality Infrastructure Project. And that kind of helps, but it ties in with the Food and Drug Administration, NAFDAC, and the Standard Organization of Nigeria. So definitely things are being done. They're not quite there yet, but things are being done. And then very quickly in the area of fertilizers that you were saying, Nigeria actually now kind of understands that organic fertilizers are good, but generally, right, and I would just let you know that fertilizer consumption is low, okay, and the figures are about 10 kilograms per hectare per annum, and you can compare that to about 200 kilograms in Europe and 150 in Bangladesh. So even with fertilizers, not even organic, we're not quite there yet. So maybe this is just a few things. I think some of those other things you will find in the report, and as I said, it will be made available to anyone who's interested.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, we have time for one more question, otherwise I will be seriously overstaying my welcome. Going once? The report is available, as Falaka said, you can write either of us or the unit at the back and email, and we will gladly send it to you. Okay. From my side, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Sri and Falaka for a very insightful talk. Thank you, small from us. So you're sort of collecting them at this stage of the game. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending and for your questions and attention. We look forward to seeing you again at our next exciting episode. Enjoy the rest of the day.